Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here. This is the Thunder God Sid, or the Orlandeau character of you, as many of you might know him from War of the Visions. I obviously know him as TG Sid. I originally bought Final Fantasy Tactics. This is the PlayStation 1 disc about 25 years ago now. One of my favorite games. Absolutely love this character and what they've done to rerun Final Fantasy Tactics to at least bring it up to the current state of the game. And I wanted to give this character love that I hadn't been able to in the past because I wasn't a content creator back then, but now I can give a formal character review on him, and I do plan on doing many of the other Final Fantasy Tactics units as well. So jumping into things, I'm condensing all this into a one big video, not my part 1, 2, and 3 like I normally do, but it's going to be all the same sections, minus the AI and auto prioritization is not as much for him as you might think. But jumping into things, the character overview, lightning element unit, they gave him the Sword Saint, unique main job with the Samurai and Knight main jobs. Equips the sword, the hat cloth, and accessory with a move of 3, jump of 1 in his base form. He is a cost 80 unit, and quite honestly might be the best cost 80 unit in the game. He certainly makes a case. Now for the resistances here, part of his MA2 was that they buffed up a bunch of his resistances, so 30% to slash, which is an immense amount, 25% to missile, both really good ones, but there are some worrisome ones here at the minus 5% to magic, minus 10% to pierce. The 10% to strike is nice, but really not all that impactful in practical states of the game. From a status ailment perspective, now he is a 50 faith unit. You will not have a high faith amount on him. Disable and Poison are cool. Those are popular types. They're just maybe not as debilitating as some of the others. Disable certainly is, don't get me wrong. But overall, nothing too crazy to look out for from a status ailment perspective. Now we get into the base stats of things. Overall HP, he is a top 20 unit for base HP. He does skew on that bulkier side. That's part of his character profile. We're going to see that highlighted a lot here in terms of how that's one of his strengths overall as a damage dealer. So coming here at that number 20 mark, from an attack perspective, base attack also skewing very high, top 20 characters in the game. He definitely is part of that next level down in terms of base attack, but trust me, you're not going to notice that on the final stat screen. He gets to immensely high attack levels due to a variety of his passives and buffs, and naturally great lightning vision cards as well. Now for the agility perspective, this is kind of one of the trade-off weaknesses. I'm not going to say he's slow, but he's definitely on the slower side of things. He does end up being average agility in the end, but in terms of base agility, definitely on the lower side of things. So when you apply those 15 and 8% agility buffs, he's not going to get as much from them as your normal units will. Now from a dexterity standpoint, also relatively average. This is out of a list of 120 total URs. He's like basically right in the middle. And honestly, a little on the lower end too, considering how high some of the units get on the top tier edge of things. But from a luck perspective, also kind of in the middle, at least again from the base luck perspective. So no real like debilitating weaknesses here in the innate stats, other than maybe the agility from the base perspective. But his character does make up for that with the board stats, which you're going to see right now. So from the total stat reconciliation of the base to what his board nodes and mastery give him and everything, the base stats overall, he does start off really strong with the attack stat. HP is definitely a forte as well, but they do some really interesting things with the board stats for him that completely change where he kind of ends up innately, so that when you look at the total stats, overall, he does get a pretty big decrease in the attack and the dexterity side of things, at least compared to where other characters end up, and I'll explain a little more about that in a second here, but he does get some pretty big buffs, if you will, from the board for his agility stat and the luck stat. I'm very actually surprised how high his total luck innately gets. Now, for kind of looking at the sources of it here, you can see this attack stat here from the board stats. His EX upgrade, they barely gave him anything there, but agility-wise, they gave him 11 points total, where most characters really only have like maybe 6 to 8 on average. So they did make up for that base agility just a little bit, and the luck of 100 is actually an exceptionally high amount. Most characters get in that like 70 to 80 range, so it's nice they rounded him out this way. It actually yields some interesting results. But other than that, only noteworthy things is just the amount of HP they end up pumping into him via the board nodes and his mastery abilities overall. Now, when we look at a little bit at the crit hit and crit avoid, you know, we saw on, and just again on this prior screen here, dexterity ends up being on the lower side of things, where luck definitely skews upward, and both those stats correlate directly to these metrics, where the innate critical hit rate, which scales off your dexterity, ends up being kind of in the middle to lower end, and the crit avoid rate, which scales directly off your luck, he actually ends up on the pretty high side of things, which is a part of his survivability to potentially evade as many critical hits as your average character. So good things there overall. I don't think anything terribly weak as a takeaway. The innate critical hit rate, that could certainly bumped by a variety of different means, so I'm not too worried about that. When you look at the accuracy, so this blue line you're seeing is total innate accuracy just off the stats, but the green takes into account your passives, meaning anything that's pure accuracy up, luck percentage up, dexterity percentage buffs. So he does start off a little bit above the average just from a total innate accuracy standpoint, where the average is 161%. He's 10% more accurate in his base form, but he definitely, you can see by the green line, falls behind just a bit here compared to many of the other, let's say, newer and top-end units where the average is 172% and he's basically at average. There's honestly nothing wrong with that. There's a lot of ways you can still get him to accurate levels. It just takes a little bit more of an investment to do so. Now we look at the evasion. This was actually kind of eye-opening to me. When I make this evasion chart, now I do stress test this to say if a character was maxing evasion the way they should, meaning two 35% luck vision cards, one of them in the main, one of them in the sub, the luck set bonus, the luck Truststone passive of 10%. And Orlandeau surprisingly gets to this 117%. I consider this B tier evade. If you told me that he was going to be 6% innately less evasive than Joker, only 6%, I would have told you you're fucking crazy. I wouldn't believe it. But this is misleading. Two big things to really keep in mind. Number one, it does assume he's using his 12% evasion passive, which you probably aren't using in the majority instances at the moment. But number two, it does assume a second 35% luck vision card, which Lightning does not have at the moment. So you will not feasibly be achieving these levels of evasion at this time. But when they do decide to put that Lightning vision card in, like, yeah, there's a world where he is going to evade more than I thought previously. Which brings us finally to the DPS report card. This is obviously a great stepping stone to bridge the gap between the stats and what we're going to go into in the abilities next, and then when we finally wrap things up with the general thoughts before we get into the optimization portion. So from an effective HP perspective, it's an A. Now I have to say the effective HP stat here is slightly misleading only from the fact that if you consider how the metric is made, it's a blend of both your actual health point stat, but also your resistances. Where he gets so high here in the grading is that his health points are just crazy high above what most other DPS get. He can easily get like 12,000 HP in the game, but he doesn't nearly have the resistances that many do, at least from a defense and spirit perspective, as well as some of the innate resistances. So again, just kind of carrying on here, the physical HP side of things, he does skew higher, just given some of the positive stats that we saw there on the slashing missile, as well as the innate 7 defense. The magic is a B. Honestly, he's actually a lot weaker than what this implies. This is a B just because his HP is so magnificently high. It's nothing to actually do with the resistances themselves. So when we look at him like more comprehensively, he does have some significant pierce and magic weaknesses, which are going to get him absolutely blown away in the wind if you don't do anything about. He has innately 7 defense and no spirit, and no other way to innately boost either of those. So he's kind of capped at those limits. So a little bit on the squishier side of things to offset the health pool. Now from a primary stat perspective, giving him an A-, but again, this should be an asterisk on this. It really could be an A+. It's just you have to consider all the passives and buffs you give him, but it's also underrated because he has an exceptional list of imperils that will amplify his damage as well. So this is an A-, but it might as well be an A+. It's really, really incredible how high his attack stat and damage output can get when used properly. Now agility is a straight C. Nothing wrong with that. It's totally average. You can still get him, into that low 100s range though, but 105 to 110 is certainly doable, so not the end of the world. Accuracy wise, it's a C. As we saw, he's right at the average, but I am going to round up to a C+ here because his main ability, the low cost one, which is the defense break, also has a 30% hit chance as part of the EX upgrade. So he does actually get a decent amount of extra accuracy from that. So worth mentioning. Evasion wise, he's that B tier evasion. I'm going B- here. The potential is there, but he's not an evade unit, at least not yet. And even when that card does come around, he'll probably be power crept at that point. But I thought that was interesting. From a movement perspective, I'm giving him a B. He does have a passive that gives him the jump +1, which if he unequips, you can still retain the 15% HP that the other one gives. We'll see that in just a second here. So overall, really great movement potential there. Passives, I'm giving him a B as well. He does have great HP and attack passives. It's not that it's not terribly unique, but it doesn't scale across a variety of metas very well, at least to what some other passives potentially could. Now, counter abilities, I am going an A. He's got a great AP generating passive, but there's actually a second one that I think I almost prefer in this new version of Sid MA2 EX upgrade. Now, the overall kit, I am going a B+. There are some significant weaknesses to it that we'll get to in this next section here, but overall in the main kit, really, really impressive on the main job. Now, for the final grade here, I need everyone just like grab hold of something because I feel like I'm about to get doxxed into submission and everyone's about to unsubscribe. I'm going a B for the final grade, despite all these excellent things I've said, despite the history he has. But stay tuned, I think I can make a pretty convincing argument as to why he ends up at that B. There's still things holding him back despite some of these excellent attributes and stats. If the best way for me to summarize it is that he just hasn't aged well with where the game has gone from a balance perspective in terms of what gives certain characters value. And again, this is also really from like the Guild War perspective too. If you're talking PvE or Arena, this guy is still absolutely top tier. But getting to the next section here, the class and job overview, the passive abilities here, Thunder God is one of the ones you're going to want to have almost all the time. It's kind of the double-edged sword here where you get the 60% attack buff, but the minus 8% resistances to all 5 of those types. That's where he gets that very negative pierce and magic weakness from. The Blade Soul one, again, that's for that evade build. You're really not going to be using that though, nor would I recommend it due to the decrease in the defense stat. Battle-wise is probably the one you're going to have the other majority of the time, but if you don't want that jump, you can just go to regular HP level 1 and still retain that same 15% HP. So that's some nice movement flexibility. And Divine Protection, fair, fine, very unique, but probably not one of the top 2 passives you want equipped. Now we get to the counter abilities. Auto Refresh here gives a 30% chance to regenerate 15% of your total AP. This is genuinely very, very good, but they've done some things in his kit so that he's not as AP reliant like he used to be. I almost don't know if you need this on all the time. I would prefer Sword Guard in a handful of instances here where 10% chance less that it happens, but reducing all incoming damage by 30%, I actually think leans in really well to how he can effectively mitigate incoming damage. So I think there's a trade-off there between the two, obviously. I would probably go Auto Refresh just in my gut, but Sword Guard, don't sleep on it. That's also a very valuable one, potentially. Now for the main job, we're going to talk about the buffs first and then the offensive abilities. This is the first crack in the armor for TG Sid. He's only got 1 buff on the main job. And not only does he only have 1 buff, it's only got 2 casts. So while this is a excellent buff, attack of 40%, AP restore 10% for 3 turns, nullifies 3 status ailments entirely, and increases the AoE resistance of 40 for 3 turns as long as his HP is above the 70%. Obviously a great buff. Now, if you do Dispel on this buff, I did a little testing in game. I think the only thing that truly gets dispelled is the attack of 40%, and I think the AoE resistance technically does too. But just on that note, that AoE resistance not as impactful as you might think. Again, the effective HP trade-off is that he's got a ton of HP, but not a lot in the way necessarily of the defense to offset or some of the resistances. So you'd be surprised how easily you can get him below that 70% HP, and he'll still be at like 8,000 HP. It's a ton of HP. It's just that that threshold is not as impossible to break through as you might think. But he has no teammate buffs here on the main job and very limited ones in the sub job. So from an AI perspective, he's actually got some gaps that most other top tier characters don't have. And that'll limit him across a variety of different metas and maps. Now when we get to the second part of this, the offensive buffs. This is where like off the charts amazing. Crush Armor, defense break of 25. It's got that 30% hit chance as well. Crush Weapon is the highest modifier ability here at 200. It's only the attack debuff of 30% though. Although this modifier is very high, I would actually recommend turning this ability off in many instances. I would much rather him rely on his 3 other abilities here for the Imperils to do the damage. Not only for the extra damage, but because these 3 Imperils will vastly help his teammates as well. Divine Ruination is excellent at that 38% Imperil. Shadowblade, a little more niche. That healing potency isn't what it used to be. And being such a low modifier, it's not one he's going to spam quite often. It's not significantly cheaper than the other ones as well. But Hallowed Bolt Extreme, this is the EX upgrade 120 ability. This is amazing ability, genuinely. Now, one of the things I want to keep in mind here when we talk about these abilities is that there is unfortunately a downside that they are mostly single target ability, and I do consider Divine Ruination a mostly single target, if only because there's some very strict things that have to happen to get you perfectly lined up with people behind it as well. So not only is he a little more limited to single target, but the heights on these are all height of 1. Most characters have at least a height 2 ability somewhere, so certain map topographies are definitely going to screw them up. Now, Hallowed Bolt Extreme is flexible in that it is a range height of 1, but that AoE height, meaning the center square has a height of 1, but if there's an enemy that's 1 more square above that center square, he can hit them, so there is some flexibility there. I'll give him that. I love that it has 4 casts. That's definitely a saving grace, but this is one of the second cracks in the armor here, where he's a little more limited to the attack types. Now we get to the Sword Saint sub job. Honestly, not a lot here to like other than what we were just talking about with the range height of the Hallowed Bolt. Crush Helm is not nearly as impactful as it should be compared to other main job abilities. Duskblade will not be used in PvP. And Hallowed Bolt definitely has some extra height flexibility here, but one of the lowest modifier abilities in his kit, which is a fair trade-off. But the 25% chance to inflict silence, again, he's not a status effect proccing character. And if you're hoping to inflict silence, that means you're going against magic enemies, which he doesn't innately do very well against. So kind of a confusing trade-off there for what this ability does. So these are okay, but I would, again, lean more toward PvE for these. When we talk about the Samurai sub, this is probably the one that I'm equipping most of the time, if not all the time. There's 2 things here to really like. First is the Hien ability, where 137% sure is lower than many of his main job ones, but after you've imperiled an enemy, this 12 AP cost for this is just exceptionally good. It is a range height of 2. Devotion is the only other buff that I really like here, and even then, it's already redundant that you don't get that 30% attack that will not stack with the main buff on the main job. But if you run out of the main job, this is certainly a nice backup. The crit rate of 15 certainly is nice. Illusion here, unfortunately, there's nothing evasive about lightning as a comp, so this teammate buff, it's the only one that exists, is just not a good buff for what he wants to do or for what the lightning team wants to do. Now when we look at the knight sub job, this is again more PvE oriented. A lot of decent breaks here, but their range is literally like 1 square ahead of him. Trinity break might be the best one here in that it's a pretty awesome break on the attack, magic, and agility stats. Slightly more range, but 34 AP is pretty expensive for this, but again, more PvE oriented. Now we look at the limit break and mastery. This limit break is actually a very, very good one, but there's some hidden downsides. So number one, very large AoE. I love how forgiving that is, that you can feasibly hit a lot of people in it. 43 AP is very cheap for this. It grants him haste, which obviously is very strong. And if he has haste, it increases debuff resistance by 50%, which is exceptionally strong. The AP consumption decrease is also exceptionally strong. The small downside here, though, is that with the release of Velis, all these characters that have been coming out since then, there's a lot of ways to remove haste from characters. And so while this might have been like kind of unstoppable at one point, there's a lot more ways to remove the haste, which if you do at that point, well then it's just a giant AoE 200% modifier, which is good, but not team fight changing. And it's, again, this limit break, so it's only one ability. If you're depending on this limit break to win your fight, and if you can't use it, you lose, that obviously stinks for second Guild War attacks or defense, which is why I say if you're going for just PvE or arena where you just need to win one fight, this actually is exceptionally good. Now for the mastery ability, whole bunch of things here. Some HP, lightning attack, the defense of 5, the slash attack 10. This defense penetration of 30 is the real one to highlight that I haven't talked about yet. He does have innately like 10% less defense penetration than most DPS, but that's really to offset the imperils. I think it's a fair trade. And you also get the resistance buffs here to his weapon type resistance as well. So overall, really, really awesome mastery upgrade. Now we look at the TMR. This is a TMR that I think has aged decently well. There's still some downside though. Stat wise, I do like the HP on it for an accessory. 8 defense, 5 agility certainly is a thumbs up. The ability itself, we're getting into the stage where single use TMRs are decreasing in value. So that's one strike against it. The second thing is, although this is really great for that 35% damage reduction, it's a general barrier, that also means it can be broken by both physical barrier break and magical barrier break, which there's a lot more of in the game currently. So this barrier isn't nearly as impactful as it once was. It's still a pretty handy TMR, it just hasn't aged as well as some of the newer ones will. Now, my general thoughts overall. Offensive Juggernaut, that's gotten significant value with the Lightning cast and the vision cards of them. Being confined to slash only is no longer a handicap. There was a day where him being slash only could easily be mitigated, but with the Esper vision card, that changes things significantly for him. So from that perspective, I have nothing but the highest praise for Sid. AoE courage removal is a fantastic level 120 ability. A ton of the top tier meta characters are reliant on their courage, whether it be Engelbert, Elena, Snow, Dark Leela. There's a bunch of characters that rely on courage. Him having that AoE dispel of it for 4 attempts is really awesome, is definite value. He does also have great self-AP management via his buff and the limit break, where formerly he didn't have that. So it was a lot harder to maintain the damage uptime. That was a really good change they gave him. So overall, 2 thumbs up for all of this. Now, from here on, is kind of more the descent downhill of where you start to see how he hasn't necessarily aged as well. He does have above average survivability due to the HP pool, but there are obviously some of those significant exposed weaknesses, that negative 18 to Pierce and the negative 13 to Magic. That is workable, though, with the Espers that I'm going to show you in the next page. But even then, it's about getting him back to the base. Every other character is going to be above him with those resists. So although you can hedge the weaknesses, he's still relatively weaker than where most characters end up. And he doesn't have any extra bulk survivability in the kit that many of the top tier characters do, whether that be things like Courage or Re-Raise, or Defense or Spirit of the passives, Protect or Shell, a self barrier that's reliable, some other form of reliable HP regeneration. There's a lot missing compared to many of the modern characters. Now, exceptional one fight potential, there's a steeper fall off after that, so I'll admit that much. So again, there's always asterisks on when characters are best and when, and I think he's definitely still top tier when it comes to that. Now, he will struggle, in my opinion, without a healer. Now, you could say the same thing for almost every character, but I say this specifically because of how his health pool is designed. That if he doesn't have the defense and spirit and the resist to necessarily negate as much of the damage as some other characters might, you are going to have to rely on healing somewhere in the battle to replenish that very large health pool. And frankly speaking, what Resnick does as a support in terms of the physical shield, the debuff resistance, the unit resistance, like all those things will absolutely elevate him. So if you play your cards right with Resnick, he could be an exceptional character. But again, ends up begging the question, is he better than Lightning with those buffs? Is he better than Esther with those buffs? A little more debatable. Now, the abilities also, in my opinion, are very height limited, mostly unit oriented, but the fact that he has a lightning apparel, a defense break, and a slash apparel in the main job is insane. His teammates are going to love the hell out of him for that. And then finally, just more about the AI. The teammate buff illusion on the Samurai sub, it's not good. He has limited AI potential because of that. That will probably be reliant on TMRs, which, again, you're going to have to try to find some dual usage TMRs if you want to repeat second battles of whatever that turn rotation is. But the buffs are a significant weakness to his kit. Now, we talk about the Espers. Esper notes to look for. This is kind of obvious, to be honest. Man killer, lightning attack, slash attack percentage up. The magic resistance and pierce resistance where necessary, and accuracy where necessary. So you might have heard me say a couple times now, like, oh, like pierce minus 18%. Well, there's not that many pierce units. And if it's an Oberyn, well, obviously he's Earth. I'm not going to take Lightning Sid against an Earth team, so I don't really care about the pierce weakness. But Wind Glaciella is coming out this week, and Wind is very strong, and they're also very magic oriented. So yeah, Sid has like lots of cause for concern against the Wind cast, and obviously against the Earth cast. So you at least want to keep something in the back of your mind of how you can mitigate that. And the Espers are actually a really great way to do this. Now, I have them ranked left to right in terms of what I think some of my more general favorites to least favorites are. Curl Esper is a great option for damage output with the lightning attack 25, also has that pierce resistance of 15. Scorpion Sentinel is a little more offensive oriented where you get modifiers of 25 and 15. Aegion is that sweet spot of perfection in balancing offense and defense where he's got both the pierce and magic resistance of 15% while also having the lightning attack of 25. That's an exceptional Esper for Sid. Odin and Dark Odin obviously are two of the best from an agility perspective and also from potential modifiers and resistances where Odin has both slash and missile resistance and the accuracy nodes, and Dark Odin has slash and magic nodes, so really a lot of good ways to play with them. Titan is a very interesting option from a bulk perspective. Now, you're going to lose damage output from the lack of modifiers in his board, but he's got 15 spirit, 22 accuracy, and if you're talking about those bulky resistances, 10% to lightning and 5% to wind, which are two elements on the uptick, and technically it's the highest attack stat out of these Espers, so it's definitely an overall damage decrease because he doesn't have the modifiers, but he addresses some pretty significant weaknesses in Sid's kit. Just on his board alone. Golem, kind of the same idea where you get that pierce resistance, man killer, defense, and Fenrir is a great option for the magic resistance and that 25 slash attack. Ogre is obviously just a great cheap option. So there are definitely ways to hedge some of the weaknesses. So it's not over at the end of the day. But then again, tides raise all boats equally. So although Sid might get some great bonuses here, other characters get these same bonuses. They just don't start at such a negative point. So relatively speaking, they're still stronger than him. Now for the weapon optimization, Coral Sword is by far the best one here. Blazefire Saber is a step down. It's missing the 15 slash attack. This is the +6 version of the... I like the assault build personally. I don't think the crit rate is nearly high enough in the critical build, but 149 attack, 30 lightning attack, 15 slash attack, and 10 crit rate. Overall, excellent sword for Sid. It's probably the best. Mythgraven Blade, I think, is just an honorable mention from the fact that it's a decreased AP consumption of 20 while still having a pretty high attack and better accuracy on it technically. So if you really were trying to play with the AP just a little bit, this is a decent option to keep in mind. And then finally, Engine Blade and Spine Blade are options, but more really niche to the tank busting, where he only has that 30 defense penetration as opposed to most DPS having 40. So the Spine Blade is good to increase that a little bit. And the Engine Blade is definitely a nerf from the lack of modifiers in the attack stat, but a little more slash resistance penetration, so you're not as reliant on the Esther card by itself. But overall, Coral Sword is the best. You're going to want to go with that. Now, vision card analysis, I'm actually not going to talk at all about this. You can almost watch my Lightning Part 3 review. It's almost exactly the same. All of these vision cards are excellent in a variety of different main card slots and sub card slots. It depends on who your teammates are and so who's wearing what. But overall, Sid is the picture-perfect Lightning character for all of these vision cards shown on the screen. So any combination of these and you're going to get some great returns. Now we finally talk about the Truststone recommendations. Left side here, HP, definitely one of the best ones. We already know how bulky he is from that perspective. That being said, defense and spirit as necessary too, given that he has lower amounts of those. So I just released a video that I highly recommend you all watch. I'm actually going to attach it in the end card here of all my deep breakdown thoughts on the Truststones on the left side of things and how you can min-max them, think about them when they're best. So defense and spirit definitely have a time and place if you use it correctly. The luck, obviously great for anti-evasion. Crit avoid if you're big brain, and I say that jokingly, but if you watch my video, you'll know why I say that. It's very math heavy and matchup related, how you can maximize the crit avoid, but when you do, it yields very high returns. In terms of the passives here, HP and luck 10%, crit avoid 15 are my standard ones, but I do think he's one of these characters, and again, I go over that in this video, where I would put the Pierce and magic resistance of 7% on him, where if you figure between this and let's say Evasion as your Esper, that's 22% extra resistance on both of those for free without even having to think about like what you have to put on for your actual equipment or vision cards for other characters. So I like these as potential passives as well, in addition to anything that's just matchup specific. That goes for all characters. Now for the right side, agility is still my favorite by far. I do think after that, the AP and the attack are decent trade-offs. I've always preferred AP to attack though. Accuracy is needed, obviously, and the passives, pretty straightforward. I don't think there's any surprises here. Attack 20%, defense pen of 10. I like the crit damage of 10. Again, you can get his crit rate high enough that it actually has some good impact there and some synergy with lightning. Slash attack resistance penetration of 10, also highly recommended. And the acquired AP 20%, you may not need given how AP efficient he is already. And as we saw, he only has the one buff and it's only 18 TP. So you're not going to get a ton from the acquired AP 20%, but it's still an honorable mention. There's not many other great ones to replace it with. And dexterity 15%, also a good idea for that extra crit rate there, as well as potential damage increase. But that's the Thunder God Sid review in a nutshell. There is actually a lot to be excited about, and he actually is a very good character. It really just comes down at the end of the day to where you play on the ladder, what your intentions are with him, who you're surrounding him with on the cast of characters, who your matchup is, and who you're trying to target. Obviously, wind is going to be very different than dark, is going to be very different than ice, so there's a lot of extra thought that should go into how you build him and how you use him. But overall, one of the better EX upgrades they've ever done in the game. And they really did him justice by taking his strengths and just leaning super hard into them so that he's still very strong in the things he was good at initially. So thanks for watching, everybody. For those of you that are building, I can't wait to hear your thoughts and your own results with him so far. But that's it for now. I'll talk to you all soon.